The congressional debut of Tim Cook. What responsibility does Apple have in this debate about corporate taxes?
Well, I think he's going to get obviously strongly questioned about their tax paying, but he also has a responsibility, which he's going to fulfill, to explain to the to the people on Capitol Hill how they deal with the tax law and make suggestions about how the tax law might be changed. He's going to get beat up today, but in fairness, if you sat in Tim Cook's seat and you were CEO of a public company, he did not write this tax law. His job, though, is to manage this tax law in an effective way for his shareholders and be a good corporate citizen, and this is how they've chosen to do it. But he didn't write this tax law, and he's going to push back probably a little bit and explain how they have to deal with it. And it's up to the legislators then to change the tax law if they don't like the way he's managing it.
Well, it could get complicated. I want to go to Capitol Hill now, where our own correspondent Peter Cook is there outside of the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, led by Carl Levin, who has already, Peter, put out some pretty strong accusations about Apple's policies.
He has indeed. They released, the subcommittee released its investigation findings yesterday. Sarah, again, accusing Apple not of violating the law, but of using a variety of tax schemes to shield income that Carl Levin and John McCain, the top Republican on this panel, are arguing should be subject to U.S. taxation. That's their argument, that the code needs to be tightened up so these kinds of practices cannot move forward. Here's Carl Levin just a short time ago speaking again to the audience at this hearing.
Apple executives want the public to focus on the U.S. taxes the company has paid. But the real issue is the billions in taxes that it has not paid, thanks to offshore tax strategies whose purpose is tax avoidance, pure and simple.
In his opening comments, Senator McCain even tougher on Apple, talking about their highly questionable tax strategies, egregious loopholes. Again, very critical of Apple and for employing these tax practices, which, again, he and Senator Levin have pointed out are not illegal, but they believe the tax code needs to be tightened up. These kinds of practices should not be allowed to go forward. What are the practices we're talking about? Let me give you a couple of examples, Sarah. They're talking about Irish entities, subsidiaries, affiliates of Apple's that Senator Levin and his subcommittee staff are suggesting were created in such a way that they were incorporated in Ireland, yet the base of their operations are they're based basically in the United States. Because of that, they're not subject to taxation in either country. They're not subject to taxation in any country in the world. And so for the last 5 years, for example, one entity paid no taxes anywhere in the world, even though it generated over the last 4 years $30 billion in revenue.
Thanks for the setup, Peter. Robert Kaplan, in your study of corporate management and corporate culture, how should the U.S. Congress deal with this issue of multinationals earning, like Apple, a bulk of their profit, or at least a majority of their profit overseas, and not being able to bring it back because the tax rate's too high?
Well, I think for starters, they ought to tighten up the rules on these offshore entities. Apple's not the only one that uses them. They're widely used. And number two, and I know they're hesitant to do this, I would like to see some type of rate that is set to encourage U.S. companies to repatriate money they've held overseas. And then going forward, I would tighten up these rules. I know a lot of people feel like repatriation incentives don't work, but I probably don't agree with that. I think it would be a good thing to do.
Well, Neil, let me put the question to you. The committee's not saying that Apple has done anything illegal, but is Apple doing something wrong?
Well, you know, what's really happening here is they're being used as a tool, sort of a political prop, where you have the senators, the chairman, the ranking member of this committee have a real problem with what Congress has done. Because ultimately, Congress, because of lobbying, because of special interests, have created this completely unworkable corporate tax code. And look, Apple has good lawyers, they have good tax planners, and they managed to exploit, you know, seemingly every area that they could to maximize the profit and return for shareholders. And now, although Apple is the target of the scorn, it's really more about the tax code that they created and Apple is now taking advantage of. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing here is an idea of using Apple as a prop in order to bring this argument back a real change that we so obviously need.
Apple has become the poster child. Robert Kaplan, what's interesting, as Peter said, is that Apple hasn't really been here before. It has this new responsibility in Washington. Steve Jobs never went to Congress to have hearings. I'm curious what you make of this transition.
Well, this is part of being CEO of one of the largest public companies in the world. And I agree with what Neil just said. He's going to find out that when you're CEO of a very large public company, you become a symbol. And when people in Congress want to make changes to the law, they may use you as a convenience symbol and beat you up a bit. But I think I agree with Neil. The larger point is they want to see the tax law changed, and I think they should change the tax law.